She stopped walking in the middle of the path, her breath catching in a way that made my chest tighten. "I need to tell you something," she said, and when she finally looked at me, her eyes held a kind of raw honesty that made everything else disappear. "This is my first date since I lost my husband, and I'm terrified because part of me still feels like I'm betraying him just by being here with you." The words hung between us in the cold air, and I realized in that moment that this woman, this stranger I'd met online just days ago, was about to change everything I thought I knew about what it meant to really connect with someone. My name is Daniel. I'm 31 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I understood what loneliness felt like. I live in a standard one-bedroom apartment on the edge of a mid-sized American city, the kind of place where everything is close enough to feel convenient but far enough that you still need a car to get anywhere that matters. My job is unremarkable, the type where you sit at a laptop all day answering emails and attending meetings that could have been messages, watching the weeks blur together until you can't remember what made last Tuesday different from the one before it. I've been using dating apps for almost 8 months. Not casually either. I was genuinely trying. The pattern was always the same. Match, exchange messages that felt promising, set up a date, meet for drinks or coffee, have a perfectly pleasant conversation, maybe see each other once more, and then watch it fade into nothing like smoke dissipating in wind. Sometimes I lost interest. Sometimes they did. Most of the time, it wasn't even a conscious decision. It just never caught fire. I remember one particular night, sitting on my couch with my phone in my hand, scrolling through profiles with the mindless rhythm of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry. I was just exhausted by the performance of it all, tired of showing up for something that never turned into anything real. That's when I saw Sarah. Her profile didn't demand attention the way others did. No clever captions designed to showcase wit, no demands to make me laugh, no perfectly staged photos that looked like advertisements for a life rather than evidence of one actually lived. Just a few natural photos, her sitting on a park bench with genuine smile, another of her reading with afternoon light falling across her face, one where she was looking away from the camera entirely, focused on something beyond the frame. The app said she was 34. 3 years older than me, which wasn't unusual, but something about the way she presented herself felt different, grounded, like she wasn't there to collect validation. I swiped right without overthinking it. We matched the next morning. I sent a simple message, nothing borrowed from the internet, no joke that tried too hard, just a real question about something she'd mentioned in her profile. She replied that evening. Not immediately, which I appreciated, and not with single-word responses either. Her messages were thoughtful, considered, like each one meant something. Over the next several days, we talked in a way that felt surprisingly mature compared to what I'd grown accustomed to. No love bombing, no excessive flirting, just two people carefully taking each other's measure. I learned she worked in healthcare administration, had her own apartment downtown, and seemed entirely uninterested in wasting anyone's time, including her own. She asked questions that mattered. What did I do? How did I like where I lived? What did my weekends actually look like? Simple questions that revealed more than elaborate ones ever could. After nearly a week of steady conversation, I did what I always did when a chat didn't feel like it was heading toward nothing. I asked if she wanted to meet in person. To my surprise, she said yes. Then she added something that made me pause, staring at my phone screen in my quiet apartment. "I don't want it to be somewhere crowded," she wrote. "No busy bar or restaurant packed with people, somewhere quiet if that's okay." She didn't elaborate, didn't explain, just stated her preference and left it there. It wasn't a red flag exactly, but it was unusual. Most people wanted the standard, safe first date, coffee shop, wine bar, somewhere public and easy. Her request felt specific, like it came from somewhere deeper than simple preference. I sat there for a long moment, phone in hand, trying to decide if it was strange. But honestly, I was tired of standard dates that felt like job interviews. Quiet sounded good. Quiet sounded human. I told her I understood completely. Asked what she had in mind. She suggested meeting near Riverside Park, a place with walking paths that was open but rarely crowded, where we could talk without fighting against ambient noise. We picked a Saturday afternoon in late October when the leaves would be turning and the air would have that sharp, clean quality that makes you feel more awake. When I set my phone down that night, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking, "This probably won't go anywhere." I was thinking, "I wonder what her story is." I had no idea how much that question was about to matter. I arrived at the park entrance 15 minutes early. I always do that, not from anxiety, but because I like having a moment to settle into a place before someone else arrives, to let the environment become familiar. I parked farther away than necessary and walked slowly toward the meeting point, hands buried in my jacket pockets, noticing how the afternoon light filtered through the half-bare trees in shafts of gold. The park wasn't empty, but it wasn't crowded either. A few people walking dogs, an elderly couple sitting on a bench feeding birds, a jogger passing by with earbuds in. Enough life to feel normal without being overwhelming. My phone buzzed. Sarah texting that she was almost there. When I saw her walking toward me along the main path, I recognized her immediately. She looked almost exactly like her photos, which already felt like a victory in the world of online dating. She wore a dark green coat that brought out the color of her eyes, jeans, boots suitable for walking. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail like she hadn't overthought it. When she saw me, she smiled, and it was cautious but genuine, the smile of someone who wanted this to go well but wasn't sure it would. "Hey," she said, stopping a comfortable distance away. "Hey," I replied, feeling my own smile form naturally. "I'm really glad you made it." "Yeah," she said quietly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thanks for being okay with meeting here." There was a pause, the kind that usually feels awkward on first dates, but this one didn't. It felt like we were both adjusting to the fact that the other person was real now, three-dimensional and present instead of just words on a screen and carefully chosen photographs. We started walking side by side, not too close, maintaining that polite first date distance. At first we talked about safe things. Work, the weather, how strange it is that you can talk to someone online for days and still not know how their voice will sound or the way they move through space. Her voice was softer than I'd expected but confident, measured like someone who chose her words carefully. She listened when I spoke, really listened, not just waiting for her turn or scanning the environment. I noticed she walked slightly slower than my natural pace, so I adjusted without thinking about it. She noticed too. "Thanks," she said, glancing at me with something that might have been relief. "I always forget that most people walk faster than I do." "I'm not in a rush," I said, and it was true in more ways than one. We reached a quieter section of the path, away from the main entrance where the trees grew thicker and blocked out some of the distant city noise. The air felt heavier here, weighted, like the conversation was about to shift into something more substantial than weather and work. Sarah slowed, then stopped walking entirely. "I should probably tell you something," she said. Her tone had changed, not dramatically but noticeably. The lightness was gone, replaced by something heavier, more deliberate. "Okay," I said, stopping beside her, turning to face her fully. She didn't look at me right away. Her eyes were focused on something in the middle distance, like she was gathering courage or choosing her words with extreme care. "This is my first date," she said, then immediately corrected herself. "My first date since I lost my husband." The words didn't hit me like a shock. They settled slowly, sinking in layer by layer. I felt my breath steady rather than quicken, felt something in my chest both tighten and open at the same time. "Oh," I said quietly, because anything louder would have felt wrong, would have broken whatever delicate thing was forming between us. She nodded, still not looking directly at me. I almost canceled, more than once. I wasn't sure if I was ready. Her voice dropped even quieter. "I'm still not sure if I am." I waited. I didn't interrupt, didn't rush to fill the silence with reassurance or platitudes. I could tell this wasn't a moment that needed fixing. It needed space, needed to be witnessed rather than solved. After several long seconds, she finally turned her head and looked at me directly. Her eyes were darker than they'd seemed in the photos, holding depths I hadn't anticipated. "I didn't want a crowded place," she said. "I didn't want noise and strangers laughing and drinking like the world hasn't completely fallen apart. I needed somewhere I could breathe if this became too much. That made perfect sense. More than sense. It felt obvious once she'd said it. I understand, I said, and I truly did. She took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. I want to keep living, she said, the words barely above a whisper. I just don't know how to start again. I don't know if I remember how to be a person who gets to want things. That was the moment everything changed. Not the fact that she'd been married. Not the fact that she'd experienced profound loss. It was the vulnerability in that admission, the courage it took to say those words out loud to someone who was still essentially a stranger. I checked in with myself, expecting to find fear or doubt or the instinct to protect myself from something complicated. None of those feelings appeared. Instead, I felt something unexpected, a deep, settled calm, a certainty that had no logical basis but felt absolutely true. I'm really glad you told me, I said. And I need you to know that this doesn't scare me. Her shoulders visibly relaxed like she'd been bracing for rejection and it hadn't come. I'm not expecting anything, I continued, keeping my voice gentle but clear. We're just walking and talking, that's all this has to be. She nodded slowly and I saw moisture gathering at the corners of her eyes, though she didn't let the tears fall. That helps more than you probably realize. We started walking again, side by side, the same comfortable distance as before. The conversation didn't immediately return to lightness. It stayed in that deeper register, honest and unguarded. She told me about her life now, not the details of her loss but where she currently stood. Her routines. How some days felt almost normal and other days the weight would return for no discernible reason, pinning her to the bed or making simple tasks feel insurmountable. How she downloaded the dating app late one night after too much wine and loneliness, then deleted it the next morning, then downloaded it again a week later, then deleted it again, repeating the cycle until finally leaving it installed and actually responding to a message. I told her about my own experience with dating apps, how I'd been going through the motions with people who seemed fine on paper, but with whom nothing ever clicked in any real way. How I wasn't looking for drama or intensity, just something that felt genuine. At one point, she looked at me with something like wonder. It's strange, she said. I didn't expect to feel this normal, like I'm not performing or hiding. Same, I said and meant it completely. We didn't touch. We didn't flirt in any obvious way. There was no dramatic romantic moment, no movie-perfect exchange. But there was something else, something quieter and more substantial. Comfort, safety, the rare sense that neither of us was pretending to be anything other than exactly who we were. When we reached the end of the path and looped back toward the parking area, I realized I wasn't thinking about how the date was going or whether it would lead anywhere. I was just present, just there with her, and that felt remarkable in its rarity. As we approached the lot where we'd both parked, Sarah slowed her pace again. "Thank you," she said, stopping and turning to face me fully for the first time since her confession on the path. "For not making this weird, for not running." "I didn't think it was weird," I replied. "I thought it was honest. That's better than 90% of the dates I've been on." She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. There was a brief pause, both of us standing there in the fading afternoon light, and I could feel the weight of a question neither of us had asked yet. "I'd like to see you again," I said, committing before I could overthink it. "If you want to." She didn't answer immediately. I watched something move across her face, calculation, fear, hope, desire, all flickering past in rapid succession. Then she nodded. "I do," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all afternoon. "I really do." I watched her walk to her car, a silver Honda parked 3 rows over from mine, and felt something I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. Not excitement, not the flutter of attraction, but something deeper and more sustainable. Hope. The genuine belief that something real might actually be possible. After that first date, nothing changed overnight, and that was precisely what made it work. We didn't suddenly start texting constantly or making elaborate plans. We just stayed in contact, a message in the morning, a brief check-in after work. Sometimes a funny article or meme, sometimes just a simple "how was your day?" It felt natural, unforced, like we were both testing the weight of this connection without trying to rush it into something it wasn't ready to be. A few days later, We met again at a small cafe on her side of town, tucked away on a side street where the tables were spread far apart and the music was low enough to actually hear each other speak. Then we met again after that, and again, establishing a rhythm that felt sustainable rather than consuming. Our dates remained simple. A quiet dinner at a Thai place where the owner knew Sarah by name and didn't ask questions when she introduced me. A walk through a neighborhood neither of us lived in, just wandering and talking without destination. Once she came over to my apartment and we cooked together, attempting pasta from scratch and laughing when I burned the garlic and she oversalted the sauce. I remember thinking how rare it was to hear her laugh without that slight hesitation, without the shadow that seemed to follow her other expressions. She didn't talk much about her past at first, and I learned quickly not to ask direct questions. Sarah opened up best when she didn't feel cornered, when information could emerge naturally rather than being extracted. So I let conversations move at their own pace, following her lead, providing space when she needed it and attention when she offered pieces of herself. One evening about 3 weeks in, we were sitting on my couch with several feet of space between us, not quite touching but close enough to feel each other's presence. The TV was on but neither of us was watching it, the light from the screen flickering across the dim room. "I get scared sometimes," she said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. "About what?" I asked, turning to face her more fully. "About getting used to this," she replied, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "About feeling okay again. Like if I let myself relax completely, something terrible will happen. Like happiness is a trap I'm not supposed to fall into." I nodded, letting her words settle before responding. "That makes complete sense." She looked at me with something like surprise, maybe even relief, like she'd expected me to argue or try to logic away her fears. "I don't want you to feel like you have to be strong around me," I added. "You don't owe me optimism or performance. You can just be wherever you actually are." That was when she told me about the guilt, not in dramatic detail or with tears, but quietly, matter-of-factly. How there were moments when she felt wrong for smiling, for enjoying a meal, for finding someone new attractive. How part of her still felt married, still felt like she was betraying a promise even though rationally she knew he was gone and wouldn't want her to suffer forever. "I don't expect you to fix any of this," she said quickly, almost defensively. "I just need you to know where my head is sometimes, why I might pull back or get quiet for no apparent reason." "I'm not here to fix you," I said. "I'm just here, however that looks." She absorbed that, really took it in. I could see it in the way her shoulders dropped slightly, the way her breathing deepened. From that point forward, something shifted. Not dramatically, but steadily, like ice slowly melting. She started staying longer when she came over, no longer watching the clock or making excuses to leave. She'd lean against me when we watched movies, gradually closing that physical distance we'd maintained. The first time she rested her head on my shoulder, she froze for half a second, and I could feel her entire body tense like she might pull away. I didn't move, didn't react, just stayed completely still and let her make the choice. After a long moment, she relaxed, settling into the contact. Trust, I was learning, isn't built with grand gestures or declarations. It's built in tiny moments of not flinching, of showing up consistently, of making space for someone to be complicated without punishment. There were still difficult days. I could always tell when she was carrying more weight than usual. Her voice would be quieter, more distant. She'd cancel plans and then apologize excessively like she owed me perfect attendance. "You don't have to explain," I told her after one cancellation. "If today's not a good day, that's completely okay. I'll be here tomorrow." She looked at me through the phone screen with something close to disbelief. "Most people don't say that. Most people get frustrated or take it personally." "I'm not most people," I replied, not trying to be impressive, just honest. As weeks became months, I noticed changes in her that she probably couldn't see herself. She smiled more readily. She initiated plans rather than always waiting for me to suggest them. She reached for my hand when we walked, not every time, but often enough that it felt intentional rather than accidental. One night while we were lying in bed talking, the lights off and the city quiet around us, she said, "I didn't think I could feel close to someone again without it hurting, without feeling like I was losing something else." "Does it hurt now?" I asked carefully. She was quiet for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "It feels safe. That's what scares me, actually, that it feels this safe." That word, safe, stayed with me for days afterward. I wasn't pretending this was easy for her. I wasn't blind to the weight she carried or the moments when the past would surface and pull her under temporarily. But I also wasn't afraid of it anymore. I liked who she was, not despite her complications but including them, accepting the whole package rather than just the easy parts. For the first time in almost a year, I deleted the dating app from my phone, not because I'd made some commitment or promise, but simply because I didn't feel the need to look anymore. I'd found what I'd been searching for without realizing what it was I actually needed. Sarah noticed. "You're different from anyone I've met before," she said one evening while we were cooking dinner together. "You don't rush. You don't disappear when things get hard. You don't make me feel like I need to be someone else to deserve your attention. I'm just being myself," I said, stirring pasta while she chopped vegetables. She smiled, really smiled, the kind that transformed her entire face. "I think that's exactly why it works." It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't the dramatic sweep of a romantic movie. It was better than that. It was real, solid, built on truth rather than fantasy. The idea of traveling together didn't arrive as some grand romantic gesture. It emerged quietly during an ordinary evening, somewhere between deciding what to order for dinner and discussing our upcoming work schedules. We were sitting at my kitchen table, eating Thai takeout straight from the containers, when she mentioned she had a few days off coming up at the end of the month. I realized I did too. "What would you think about getting out of town for a few days?" I asked, the words coming out before I'd fully thought them through. Nothing elaborate, just a short trip somewhere quiet. Sarah put down her fork and leaned back in her chair, and I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes. Not about logistics or money, but about something deeper. About vulnerability, about trust, about sharing space in a way we hadn't yet. "I've never done that before," she said finally. Not like this." "I know," I replied. "We don't have to, it was just a thought." She shook her head gently. "No, I don't mean it that way. I just need to think about it." "Take whatever time you need," I said, and meant it completely. That night after she left, I wondered if I'd pushed too far, too fast. Not because the suggestion was unreasonable, but because I understood how much weight even small steps carried for her. I told myself that if she said no, I would accept it without disappointment or pressure. 2 days later, she called me instead of texting. "I want to go," she said without preamble. "I'm terrified, but I want to try." We chose a small coastal town 3 hours north, nothing flashy or touristy. Just a quiet place with a harbor, walking paths along the water, and small restaurants where you could actually have a conversation. Somewhere neutral that didn't belong to either of us or remind her of places she'd been before. The drive up was comfortable. Music playing low, windows cracked to let in the October air, conversation flowing naturally and falling into easy silence just as naturally. About halfway there, she reached for my hand where it rested on the center console, hesitated for just a moment, then took it. "Is this okay?" she asked. "More than okay," I replied. When we checked into the small bed and breakfast I'd found, something shifted in the air between us. Not dramatically, just a subtle awareness that we were sharing space differently now. A room, a routine, mornings and nights under the same roof, however temporarily. The first evening, we walked down to the harbor and found a seafood restaurant with windows overlooking the water. We ordered too much food and laughed about it, sharing dishes and talking about nothing important, just being together in a new place. Back at the room, there was a moment of awkwardness, both of us aware that we'd be sleeping in the same bed for the first time, but Sarah handled it with the same quiet directness she brought to everything. "I want this," she said, meeting my eyes. "I want to be close to you. I just need you to be patient if I get weird about it." "I'm not going anywhere," I said. That night, we lay together in the unfamiliar darkness, and she curled against me with a kind of trust that felt almost sacred. I could feel her breathing gradually slow and deepen as she fell asleep, and I stayed awake for a while, just experiencing the weight of her head on my chest, the warmth of her body against mine, the profound intimacy of being trusted to hold someone while they are at their most vulnerable. The next morning I woke to find her already awake, propped on one elbow, watching me. "Hey," she said softly when she saw my eyes open. "Hey yourself, how long have you been awake?" "A while, I was just thinking." "About what?" She was quiet for a moment. "About how I didn't think I could do this. Share a bed with someone, wake up next to someone who isn't him. But it doesn't feel wrong. It just feels like the next part of my life finally starting." I reached up and touched her face, and she leaned into the contact. Over the next few days, we fell into a rhythm that felt like a preview of what real life together might look like. Morning coffee on the small balcony, deciding together where to eat, what to do, how to spend our hours. Long walks along the harbor without any destination, just moving through space together. Small decisions that didn't matter individually but somehow added up to something significant. There were moments when I saw her hesitate, when something, a couple holding hands, an elderly man walking alone, would remind her of what she'd lost. But instead of pulling away or shutting down, she stayed present. She talked about it if she needed to, or just let me hold her hand a little tighter if she didn't. One evening we were sitting on a bench overlooking the water, watching the sun set in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too vivid to be real. She was wearing my jacket because she'd forgotten hers, and the wind was picking up off the ocean. "I didn't think I could do this," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Be with someone for days at a time, sleep next to someone, share space without needing to escape. I thought I'd feel trapped or guilty or wrong, but I just feel present." I didn't say anything, just pulled her a little closer, and she let herself be pulled. That night she held on to me with a kind of certainty that felt new, not desperately but securely, like she'd made a decision and was committed to it. On the drive back home, the mood was different. Fuller somehow, weighted with something unspoken but mutually understood. We were both carrying something new, something that had formed over those few days, but neither of us was quite ready to name it yet. A week later, she showed up at my apartment with a box instead of her usual overnight bag. "I've been thinking," she said, setting it down in my living room. "A lot." I waited, giving her space to continue. "I don't want to go back to my place tonight," she said, meeting my eyes. "Or tomorrow, or the next day. I want to stay here, with you, if that's okay." I felt my chest tighten, not from fear but from the overwhelming weight of trust she was placing in me. "Are you sure?" She nodded, and for the first time since I'd known her, there was no hesitation in her expression. "I've never been more sure about something that scares me this much." We didn't make it official that night. There was no dramatic speech or declaration, just the quiet understanding that something real had taken root and was growing into something neither of us had planned but both of us wanted. That night when we went to sleep, it didn't feel like a visit. It felt like coming home. Living together didn't begin with an announcement or a plan. It started with Sarah simply not leaving. One night became two, two became a week became a month. Her toothbrush appeared next to mine. Her coffee mug claimed a spot in the cabinet. Her books started filling the empty spaces on my shelves. It all happened organically, like neither of us wanted to force the moment by naming it too directly. One morning, about 2 weeks after she'd brought that first box over, I woke before her and stood in the kitchen making coffee. I felt her arms wrap around my waist from behind, her forehead pressing against my back. "I slept really well," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. That simple sentence, delivered with such easy contentment, hit me harder than any grand declaration could have. We talked that afternoon, not because something was wrong, but because it felt right to be explicit about what we were building. "I don't want to feel like I'm just staying over anymore," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "But I also don't want to rush you into something you're not ready for." "I don't feel rushed," I replied. "I feel settled, like this is exactly where we're supposed to be." She looked visibly relieved. "Me too." That was when she decided to really move in, to make it official rather than just circumstantial. She went back to her apartment, packed slowly and thoughtfully, bringing the things that mattered, books and photos and small objects that held memories. She didn't erase her past. She brought pieces of it with her, integrating it into our shared space. I made room without asking what should go where, and she noticed, arranging her things alongside mine until the apartment felt like it belonged to both of us rather than just me hosting her. Our life together wasn't perfect. It was beautifully, messily normal. Mornings were quiet, one of us always waking earlier to make coffee and leaving a mug for the other. Evenings were shared dinners, sometimes elaborate cooking projects, sometimes takeout eaten straight from containers. We learned each other's rhythms and habits, the endearing ones and the annoying ones. I left cabinet doors open. She lost her keys at least 3 times a week. We laughed about it instead of fighting. There were still hard days for her, moments when grief would surface unexpectedly and pull her under. On those days, she didn't push me away anymore. She let herself be held. She cried when she needed to and accepted comfort without apologizing for needing it. One night several months after she'd moved in, we were lying in bed in the darkness, the city sounds muted through the windows. "You know," she said quietly, "when I went on that first date with you, I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't even sure I was capable of it anymore." "What were you looking for?" I asked. "Proof that I could still connect to someone without completely falling apart. Evidence that some part of me was still alive enough to want things." And now, she turned toward me, and even in the darkness I could see her eyes. "Now I feel alive. Not guilty about it, not afraid of it, just alive." That was when I knew with absolute certainty that this was real, that what we'd built together was solid enough to last. Not because it was easy or simple, but because it was honest. Because we'd both chosen it consciously, eyes open, knowing exactly what we were getting into. A year passed. We traveled more, always in simple ways. Short trips to places neither of us had been, hotels that felt familiar by the second night. Each trip reinforced what we already knew. We worked well together. We argued sometimes, but we listened. We disagreed, but we didn't diminish each other. We chose each other repeatedly, not out of desperation or fear of being alone, but because being together felt better than being apart. People asked questions sometimes. About timing. About her past. About whether it was too soon or too complicated. We didn't owe anyone explanations. What mattered was that she chose to stay, and I chose to be steady, to be the kind of person worth staying for. One evening we were sitting on the couch, windows open to let in the spring air, city sounds drifting up from the street below. She leaned into me, fitting perfectly against my side like she always did now. "I'm glad I didn't cancel that first date," she said, almost casually, like she was commenting on the weather. I smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Me too." This wasn't a story about fixing someone or being saved. It was about two people meeting at exactly the right moment in their lives, when they were both ready for something real even if they didn't know it yet. It was about patience and letting things grow at their own pace without forcing them into shapes they weren't ready to take. Sarah didn't replace what she'd lost. She built something new, and so did I. We built it together, one quiet day at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one moment of choosing each other at a time. And in the end, that was everything.